Good morning, everyone. I really loved yesterday when Ryan Smith was on stage and he was talking about how crazy it is that we divide all of our employees up into different parts of the organization, and then we cross our fingers. We hope that they're going to work together to deliver a great customer experience. And I actually have the pleasure of introducing you to the person who is ultimately responsible for this. And his name is Frederick Winslow Taylor. He published a book called The Principles of Scientific Management in 1911, and he was essentially an intellectual leader of what was called the efficiency movement. He did things like watching really fun tasks, watching people do things like shoveling ore out of the back of a truck or manually inspecting ball bearings. And he came up with this idea, actually a couple of ideas, related to the division of labor and the specialization of skills. And these were really precursors to Fordism, the modern day, oh my gosh, I know I always blank on this word, assembly line, the modern day assembly line. And his work was also a precursor to essentially what we have as human resources today in our organizations. And so essentially what he did was help organizations create efficiency machines. And that essentially resulted in the functional silos that we all know and probably don't love in our organizations today. And as fun as it is to bash on those silos, they are in fact critical, essential to how we work today. There could be no Qualtrics, there could be no SAP, there could be no your organization without division of labor and specialization of skills. You can't have one person doing everything, or even lots of people doing everything. This is essential to how we work. And yet, it of course creates all kinds of problems for our customers who are trying to accomplish goals. They're trying to get things done, and they have to cross all these different silos in order to do that. And of course, the gaps in communication, the gaps in collaboration that exist between all those different silos create really so many problems, frustration, misery for our customers. And so we need a framework that will help us unite all of the disparate parts of our organization and create really seamless experiences as customers cross those different parts of our organization. And that's where the framework of the customer journey comes in. And I believe that this is actually the most important framework for delivering customer experiences in today's business world. So how many of you have heard of a customer journey? Familiar with that? Awesome. Okay, we're gonna do a bit of a deep dive into this, and I'll hopefully give you some new ways to think about the customer journey. This is a diagram that I call the archetypal customer journey. It essentially represents the 9 different phases that your customers go through as they are working towards some goal or some task that they are trying to accomplish. So your customers start out and they have some need. Maybe their boss gave them a task, or maybe they've got something in their quarterly goals. You know, they're on the way to work and creating their mental to-do list. They've got some need that triggers them to go off on this journey. They then seek out solutions, and they choose the one or perhaps more solutions that are going to help them meet their needs. And then we get to the give-get. The give-get is essentially the value exchange between your customers and your organization. I used to have this labeled buy-get, but the reality is today that there are so many different things that your customers can give you. Their money, but also their time, their attention, their contact information, in order to get some value back from your organization. Once there's that value exchange, your customers use your products, your services, your information for the first time, and then on an ongoing basis. They fix any problems that might happen to pop up during that time. And then towards the end of the journey, hopefully they love you and they're gonna return back to some prior phase of that journey. I know that's the goal that many of you have in your jobs, getting them to go back to some previous part of the journey where they're buying more from you or renewing, upgrading, increasing their engagement. But sometimes they're going to leave. And this leave part of the journey is really important. It's one that we really tend to ignore in most organizations today. And that's because we don't want to admit that our customers are going to leave us. But what that leave experience is like is really, really important. Has anyone in the room ever been in a romantic breakup? Raise your hand. Anyone? Think about the end of the customer journey with your customer and that leaving phase as similar to what it's like to have that breakup with someone. What was said, what was not said, what interactions took place, who threw whose stuff out on the lawn. All of that has a lot to do, a big impact on whether or not those people are willing to talk with each other again, whether or not they're going to say good things or bad things about that person to their friend, whether they'd consider maybe even getting back together. And so you have to think about that part of the journey and the experience at that leaving phase as well. One thing I want to say about this before I move on to my next slide is that this is meant to be an archetype. Not every customer is trying to go through all of these phases all at once. They might just go from need up until get. Some journeys are just going to be in that use, or maybe just in that fix part of the diagram here. Leave is a journey in and of itself. We want to be thinking about what are the tasks, the goals, the challenges that your customers are facing. And that really is the key indicator of what the journey is and what you should be focused on as an organization to be supporting. So why do I think that this framework of the journey is so important? Well, there are a lot of reasons. One is that it does unite different parts of the organization. But there's some great research that shows the financial impact of the journey as well. So McKinsey did some research a couple of years ago, and they were looking at a media company's onboarding journey. And they didn't say who this media company was, but based on what they said about the journey, I'm guessing it was like a Verizon or a Comcast, some organization like that, because there were about 9 different phone calls that happened during this journey. There was a visit to the customer's home from a technician, multiple emails, multiple website visits. What was great for this media company was that when they would ask customers about their experience at any one of these individual touch points, they had about a 90% chance of getting it right. Customer satisfaction was pretty strong at each of these individual touch points. But this journey took place over a period of about 3 months. And when they looked at the customer's thoughts, emotions, and perceptions about that journey overall, their scores were about 40% lower. So yeah, that technician visit to my house was great, that phone call was fine, but you are not doing a good job of helping me achieve my goal. That's what customers were telling this particular company. McKinsey also found that higher customer satisfaction in journeys predicted revenue growth. And specifically, they found that a 1-point improvement in satisfaction on a 10-point scale corresponded to at least a 3 percentage point increase in the revenue growth rate. And they did some other data that I'm not going to share with you because it gets really wonky, but essentially they did not find this for touch points, individual interactions. The journeys were much better at predicting overall financial success. And so we've got to think about the journey. We've got to incorporate the journey into our everyday work. And we need some frameworks for talking about the journey in our organizations. So we're here in beautiful Sundance. I've got this diagram here that looks kind of like a mountain, and it essentially shows what's going on with a customer journey. We've got all of those different touch points, a phone, an in-person conversation, email, websites, all kinds of different things. And you can see the journey going up and down and up and down, as parts of that journey are good and meeting customers' needs, and parts of the journey are bad. But to get your organization really thinking about this as a central framework and really developing a journey mindset, we've got to have a way to manage it. So I've developed this framework called Journey Management, and it includes 3 different pieces. First, you've got to discover the journey. You've got to figure out what's going on today. What kind of experience are you actually delivering? And are you actually supporting your customers in their goals? Then you've got to design the journey. Design might be a scary word for some of you in the room. I'm going to help to demystify this so that you really embrace it and love design. But essentially, this just means you've got to figure out what the future state of that journey should look like. And then the third part of this framework is you've got to deliver the journey that you've envisioned. And it's not just you. This is your entire organization across all those different silos. You've got to work together to deliver a great experience. So let's talk first about discovering the journey. There's a great tool out there called journey mapping. How many of you know about journey mapping? How many of you have created a journey map? All right, that makes me very, very happy. For those of you that haven't, I'm going to give you just a few quick examples of what a journey map looks like to help you understand what I think some of the key elements are. This first journey map that I'm going to show you comes from Intuit. Intuit makes the TurboTax software that I'm sure a lot of you have used to file your taxes. But what I didn't know until I found this journey map online is that they also have a service that if you're not completely comfortable doing your taxes by yourself, you can get some help from a tax professional. So this is the journey of someone going through that experience of working with a tax professional from Intuit. And I know you can't read anything on this slide. And that's okay. In fact, that is the beauty of a journey map, because we are wired to be visual to be visual animals. Humans are innately wired to make sense of visualizations, much more than we are long text documents or different rows and columns of raw data in a spreadsheet. And so this visualization can help you get some idea of what's going on with this journey without even reading a single word. So I'll orient you to it for just a second. We've got at the beginning, the customer is finding out about this journey. She has an online chat with someone. She signs up. The red step there that maybe you can see is kind of broken is where she's waiting and wondering. Then she has the meeting with the tax professional. She waits and wonders again. She gets approval, and then she finally files her taxes, does an e-filing. And again, even without reading a single word, you can see the up is good, the down is bad. That yellow undulating line helps you understand what's going on at each phase of the journey. I do want you to know a little bit about what is actually written on here, though. At this place where she is waiting and wondering before the call, it says she's worried. And then it specifically lists some of the things she's worried about. I wonder if they got my fax. Do I need to be near my computer for the phone meeting? I'm not sure what to expect. And the beauty of this is that these are not prescriptive solutions. This is not saying, hey, we need to add some FAQs to the site here, or we need to redesign the chats to happen in this way. These are just letting us know what the customer is thinking and feeling, the things that she's worried about at this stage. So Intuit could give this particular journey map to anyone in their organization, someone in customer support, customer success, marketing, digital, anywhere. And they could all come up with their own solutions for how to better meet customers' needs. All right, one more journey map that I want to show you. This one comes from the Exploratorium. Anyone been to the Exploratorium in San Francisco? Yeah, great science museum. They, of course, do lots of events for kids. I'm sure you can imagine. This picture is actually showing an event, a corporate event, that type of thing, where they allow people to come in and use the space in the evenings. And this is a journey map that Adaptive Path created for them many years ago. And again, I know you cannot read a single word that's on there. But again, that's okay, because this visualization helps you get some idea of what's going on. The box in the middle, that is the museum experience. It's essentially what's happening within the four walls of the Exploratorium. But the Exploratorium knows that people just don't suddenly teleport to the museum and then teleport home again. They have this entire part of the journey that happens before they even get there. They have some need or desire to go to the museum. They have to find out about it, learn about it. They've got to actually get there through public transportation or by driving themselves and then figuring out parking. Then they get in there and do the museum. And then afterwards, again, they don't just teleport home. They're tired, they're exhausted. The museum experience was amazing, but they are burnt out. And they want to go put their feet up and get some food and just kind of unwind from the experience. And even the parts of the experience that happen after the customer walks out the door are important to what they're thinking, what they're remembering about this experience later, and whether or not they might want to go back again. So these are just a couple of journey maps that I like because, again, they show the power of the visualization and they help us understand what's going on from the customer point of view. Once you discover the journey, then it's time, again, to design the journey. What do you want this future journey to look like? More importantly, what do your customers want this future journey to look like? I'm going to introduce you to something that is very near and dear to my heart, a human-centered design methodology. And I don't expect anyone in this room to suddenly quit their jobs and become a human-centered designer. But what I want you to understand about this methodology is that it is also a mindset. And the mindsets are what I hope that you can integrate into your work as you are thinking about defining what that future or ideal experience can be for your customers along the journeys that you're working on. So there's plenty of design diagrams out there. You could go to Google and just type in human-centered design diagram. You'll find tons of them. The one that I'm going to show you comes from the Stanford D School, and that is D School, as in design school, not B School, business, but Stanford actually has a design school. And this first phase of the design process is called empathize, something that I know Dave will love. And empathy is so critical to creating experiences and journeys that truly resonate for your customers. Empathy is essentially the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. I'm going to show you a video, though, that I think will explain empathy much better than I ever could.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, I love that video. It's Brene Brown. Any Brene Brown fans? Yeah, in the audience. She's so wonderful. I actually use the ideas from that video not only at work, but in my personal life. I've made it my mission to completely eliminate the words "at least" from my vocabulary. It is difficult, I will tell you that, but I think it's definitely changing the way that I communicate and connect with others. So when we think about empathy in this way, it really hits home to me what this first phase is about. This first phase doesn't say go out and do research. This first phase says empathize with whoever it is that you are designing for. And then, and only then, can you actually define the true problem that you're trying to solve. I've got a quick story for you about this. Also comes from the Stanford D School. And they have a class every year called Design for Extreme Affordability, where they are essentially trying to build some product service experience that is going to help some developing part of the world. And so a few years ago, their task was this: design a better incubator. Premature and low-weight babies are born in great numbers around the world, and you can imagine that in developing countries, they have a far higher mortality rate than they do in the western part of the world, certainly here in the US. And so the idea was we need to build a better incubator, one that is appropriate for the developing world. And so a team of students went from Stanford. They traveled to Kathmandu. They went into the hospital and visited neonatal units in Kathmandu. And what they discovered was that they saw these incubators, but they really weren't being used. And they were thinking, you know, if infant mortality rates are such a problem here, why aren't these incubators being used to a greater degree than they are? And then they went out into the rural villages. And what they realized when they started to talk with the people here was that most of these underweight babies and premature babies born out here never even made it in to the urban centers so that they could get the kind of treatment through the incubator that they were all thinking about. And so by going out here and empathizing with the folks who lived in these rural areas, they realized that their whole conception of the problem that they were trying to solve was wrong. What they needed to do was create something that could run without electricity, could be used out here, that would be appropriate for the culture, and also easily sanitizable. They redefined the problem based on empathizing with the customers. And this is what they came up with as their solution. It looks like a little baby burrito, but essentially what it is, it's some high-tech fabric, and it has a phase change material in a pouch that kind of goes into the front of the burrito there, and essentially it keeps the baby warm for up to 4 hours. And that was the main issue that they had to try to solve. They had to make sure that these babies were staying warm as they were being treated out there and being moved into the urban centers. What's great about it is this runs without electricity, and when it needs to be recharged, you just drop it in a pot of boiling water, and that has the effect of sanitizing it as well. So a really great solution that they just would not have come up with if they hadn't gone out and talked with the people out in these rural areas and empathized with them. So this is really all the first two phases. The empathize and the define is about coming up with the right problem to solve. Then we move on to, okay, how do we get to the right solution? And the first phase here is ideate. Ideate is just a fancy word that designers like to use that means come up with tons of different ideas. Not 3 or 4, but tens, dozens, hundreds if you can do it. This was a ideation session that I ran with a client several years ago. And so you can see you don't need any special skills. If you can come up with an idea, write it on a sticky note with a Sharpie marker and put it in a pile, you can be a participant in this design process. And once you come up with all of those different ideas, you want to choose several that you want to move forward with and prototype them. Prototypes are just quick and dirty ways of representing what some of the core features, functionality are of the product or service or experience. This was from that same workshop. This particular group had created a mobile app that they wanted to share and get feedback with from the students that you can see here. This is really, again, not anything that you need to have special skills for. But one of my very favorite prototyping experiences, examples, it comes from the innovation firm Continuum. I was working with Audi to create a car service on demand. And they wanted to prototype it, of course, before they fully built it out, and of course wanted to gauge whether or not this would even be something that their customers would want. And so the prototype consisted of 2 actual Audis. They needed the real cars, but everything else was completely faked out with glitter and duct tape. So the employees, who were a couple guys from the agency, they just went out and they bought matching clothes to form a uniform. They had a stubbed out mobile app so that the customer could use that to order a car, and their call center was just a couple of burner phones. They were able to create this prototype that really seemed real for customers, but was in fact just a facade, so that they could learn from it and understand how to make that experience better. And that's what the last phase of this journey is. It's test. You want to understand what's working and what's not so that you can make improvements. This is one of my favorite examples of testing. Obviously, I'm sure your teams do a lot of usability testing, things like that, but you can test any type of prototype. This one also comes from the innovation firm Continuum. They were working with the Holiday Inn years ago, and they created this full-scale prototype of a new lobby that they were designing. This was out in a warehouse in Western Massachusetts, and they brought in employees and customers and ran through various service scenarios to find out whether or not this design actually worked. So even though this looks like a linear process, it is in fact meant to be iterative. Sometimes you even need to go back a little bit further. But the main takeaway that I want all of you to have here is that you don't have to have a black turtleneck, you don't have to have a special degree in order to be a designer. All you need is the right mindset in order to take this approach and really be much more effective at defining what you want your future experiences to be for your customers. And now we're moving on to the third phase, which is all about delivering the journey. And I want to go back to this diagram that I showed you before about these various goals that customers have, essentially their journeys crossing the silos. So if we look at the buying journey, you can think about that there's going to be a lot of different touch points that customers go through as they are looking to buy your products or services. And that essentially equates to this mountain range that I shared with you earlier. But the fact of the matter is that this is not a mountain range. This is actually just the tip of the iceberg. And what lies below this waterline, just as with real icebergs, is enormous. It is everything that your organization does, every person that works in your organization, every policy, every process, every bit of technology that goes into either supporting your customer journeys or thwarting them. Because just as we know with real icebergs, what lies below the surface of the water can also be very dangerous to what's happening above. And so when we go back to this diagram, you can think about that water line there. And there are so many different parts of the organization that need to come together to actually deliver this experience effectively. This is difficult. I will tell you, this is difficult. This is something that organizations have been challenged by for decades. It is why your role exists. It's why the roles of customer support and customer experience exist. And now there is a new role that organizations are implementing, many organizations across the world, and this is the role of the journey manager. So I am sure everyone in this room has product managers in their organization, responsible for a product, right? But a product is in a silo. Now we're talking about managers who are looking at experiences that cross silos. And yet their role is very similar to that of a product manager. You have to understand customer needs and gaps, create a long-term vision, make the business case, herd cross-functional stakeholders from across the organization to actually execute on your vision, and also measure the ongoing impact of the improvements that you're making to make sure that they are actually creating the business outcomes that you intended. I don't expect all of you to quit your jobs and become experienced designers or interaction designers. I don't expect you all to quit your jobs and become journey managers. But I do think it's important to understand really what this journey management mindset entails. And so this example, which is from a major US telecom, I think really showcases what this journey mindset can do for an organization. So a couple years ago, they had uncovered 1,500 tactics, different tactics for contacting their customers. And this was everything from email to text, direct mail, you name it. And not only was this very complicated for this telecom to manage, imagine how overwhelming it was for their customers. And so they took a journey management approach. They essentially required 20 different departments. This was every single department that was creating some type of direct customer communication or outreach. And they required them to plot their planned communications against the key journeys that they were looking at. They also had multiple journeys that were going on. So a customer might actually be on multiple journeys at once. At once, they might be on a path that was leading them to a product upgrade, a phone upgrade, or maybe they had also called into customer service and had indicated that they wanted to terminate their contract. So they could be on multiple journeys at once, and they wanted to make sure they were reconciling the communications across those journeys, again, so that the customers wouldn't be overwhelmed with all that communication. They were also, because they knew specifically which journeys each customer was on, they were able to personalize those communications to each customer. And the net result of this was that they saw a 3% drop in churn in 6 months. All because they took a journey mindset to managing their communications with customers. So what can all of you do to create a journey mindset in your organizations today? The first thing that you need to do is listen to your customers' stories. When you're talking with customers on the phone, try to get more context about what it is they're actually trying to accomplish, rather than just thinking about this as one individual touch point or interaction. Think about it within the context of those larger goals. And you may be able to accomplish this through some of your direct conversations, email, chat with them, but you may find that you actually need to bring your customers in for a workshop, one-on-one interviews, whatever it is, so that you can actually have some focused conversations and understand their stories. That's what a journey map does, is it communicates with us the customer story. It visualizes the customer story. And so you've got to get out there and understand what those stories are. There are a few different stages to the journey mapping process, in case you do want to create maps like the ones that I showed you. And the first step is that you want to hypothesize. You want to grab a cross-functional group of your colleagues. You want to get yourselves in a room, and this can look very much like this. Just get some sticky notes, some Sharpie markers. Maybe you do this on a whiteboard, or you pull up a big sheet of butcher paper, or whatever it is. And you talk about what you think your customers are going through along a particular journey. What are they experiencing? What are the highlights? What are the pain points? But here's the thing, you cannot stop at this step, because these hypothesis maps that you create are full of assumptions. Some of those assumptions are going to be correct, but some of them are going to be incomplete, and some of them are going to be just downright wrong. And so you should not take action or start making decisions until you go on to the next phase, which I like to call invalidate. If I had called it validate, it just sounds like you're kind of checking off, like, yep, we were right, yep, we were right, yep, we were right. What you're really looking to do is invalidate your assumptions about what your customers are going through. Find out their real stories. And then and only then can you create your maps. All right, so that's the first thing I want you to do. I want you to listen to your customers' stories. And if you want to create journey maps, I would love that. I think that would be an amazing thing for your organization. The next thing you want to do is quantify key journeys. Because just like with all of your work, we're not doing this just so we can feel good about having accomplished something at the end of the day, or get some gold stars because we made a map. No, we are understanding the customer journey. We are documenting it in journey maps so that we can move the business forward. So we have to understand really how these journeys are affecting the business. And in the past, this has been really difficult because there's so much data in our organizations, and it is all completely disparate. All of these isolated data points are really challenging to bring together. But there are some new software tools, a couple that I happen to like are Kitewheel, Pinterest, that allow you to connect the information across the journey, all of these different data points, bring them together, see how one interaction affects the next, and then how that impacts revenue or cost savings or whatever type of business metric you're looking at. So you've got to think about not just understanding the journey and having it as this feel-good kumbaya framework that we're all going to gather around, but about looking at it to drive the business outcomes that your organization is after. And then the third thing that you can all seek to do is to create value all along the journey. And this really just gets back to the point of the silos one more time. Even in customer-facing roles, where we have the title customer right in there, it can be so difficult to break out of our silos and think about instead what the customer is trying to achieve and how well we're supporting it. So I encourage you all to just break out of your silos as much as you can, spread the good word of the customer journey framework and mindset across your organization to truly bring value to your organization each and every day. Thank you very much. And I think we have a few minutes for questions. Whoa, hello everyone. There you are. Yeah, in the front. You can yell to me and I'll repeat it if you want. Okay.
First of all, I want to thank you. That was amazing.
Oh, great.
I loved the different kind of methodical steps you can take a customer through their thinking. Oftentimes, I find, though, customers don't have or understand the value of that exercise or don't want to invest the time to go through that. And if they do, they expect magic to happen right after. So what would be some of recommendations you would give after you do the exercise of how to set expectations of what happens after? How do they address the current state? What should they tackle first and those things? Because I think this exercise is very enlightening, but it doesn't necessarily yield immediate results that they expect. So
yes. So a lot of the improvements that you might identify in a journey mapping workshop or in interviews, whatever kind of research you want to do with your customers, yeah, you might be impacting the way that your organization, a process that they use. Like that can't just be rolled out overnight. Or it might actually have an impact on compensation policies. And so again, these are wheels that turn very slowly, and the bigger the organization, the slower the wheels turn. So part of what I have found to be very effective is, you just need to tell customers, hey, we're going to work on this. We're going to take your input. We're actually getting input not just from you, or not just from this group, but from other groups. And we're going to be aggregating that over the next several weeks or month, whatever it is. And then we're going to be prioritizing, what we can and rolling that out and putting it into our fiscal year 2020 plan or whatever it is. I think if you're upfront with people, they don't expect things to happen overnight. Your customers are actually very reasonable people. And so you just have to set the right type of expectation. If you have people in, again, for a workshop or interviews, do follow up with them. Send them a thank you note the very next day, but then several weeks later, after you've gone through some of your analysis and prioritization, send them a note that says, hey, here are the main things that we heard throughout our entire research process, and here's what we are prioritizing to work on. Just so they know that yes, you are doing something and their time was worthwhile. In terms of the first part of your question about, how do you convince your customers to actually come in for this type of research? You can bribe them. Most organizations that I've worked with have a budget for research, and compensation is a piece of it. We do customer journey workshops where we actually bring customers in for about 6 hours, which is a long time. But they'll get compensation of $450, $500 for it, something like that. But also, with that type of activity, we find again and again, customers are just overwhelmed by the fact that the company actually wants to listen to them and get their feedback. And there's also just some other kind of softer benefits that they get. In B2B organizations, the different customers, if you bring them together, they're often swapping tips and tricks with each other. So there's lots of things that they can get out of it. Yeah. Thanks for your question. Anything else? Yeah, in the back. Like the exact opposite corner from where you were. Oh, did you have a question too? Yeah, we can start with you, and then we'll do yours in the back.
Cool, thank you. Wonderful presentation, Kerry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My question is more on the inside and the alignment of the different silos, as you mentioned. So
Yeah.
what comes with silos is, specialized work, of course, but also specialized goals that each of them have.
Oh gosh,
right?
yes.
So, sales got to drive a sales number, marketing drives SQOs, CS drive retention, you name it, everybody has something. And when a push comes to shove, their comp and their variable and their job is on the line for their thing. So what are some key tips to help drive alignment when you're going through this exercise, when everybody also has a regular job they're still being held accountable to?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is part of the reason why I said grab cross-functional colleagues to do that hypothesis mapping. Also, if you're holding a workshop with customers, bring cross-functional people in for that. The more that you can bring people in from the very beginning, you will start to create momentum for this rather than springing something on a part of the organization that wasn't even involved from the beginning. So part of this is honestly a culture building exercise and an organizational change exercise right from the start. So that's the first thing I would say. But ultimately, you've got to move up the food chain to the executive team and really get them to prioritize what are the goals that the entire organization is working on. Because yes, we're all working at cross purposes in these silos, and it's just not effective. And ultimately, it's the executive team that needs to say, here is what we all need to be focused on. I'm actually working with an organization right now, a B2B organization that sells to distributors for construction materials, and then they sell to contractors. And I had individual interviews with each of the members of the executive team, and I said, who is your customer? And they didn't even have agreement on that. Some said it is absolutely just the distributors. Some said, well, it's the distributors and the contractors. But my advice for them, I had a call with them actually yesterday afternoon. I'm like, you as the executive team have to get clarity on who your customer is. And that has to come from the CEO because you've got to rally around that. And maybe, you can't focus on all your customers immediately. Maybe you just focus on the distributors for fiscal year 2020, and then you start focusing on the contractors. But your executive team has got to set the path for this. So there is a lot that you can do from the ground up, but some of these decisions and the clarity has to come from the top. Thank you. And then question in the back. I think that might be our last question. Oh, nope, you're good? Oh, great. Fantastic. 2 for 1. Any other questions? Yes. In the front again. We're giving you a good workout here.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was
Sure.
great. My question was more about when you're identifying kind of stakeholders for your customers that you're reaching out to, like what strategies would you use? Because I'd imagine you may get different perspectives or values depending on who you're speaking to.
So is your question about reaching out internally or reaching out to customers but having to go through stakeholders?
Reaching out to customers.
Yeah. So in B2B organizations, we unfortunately run into gatekeepers a lot. That could be, someone in a customer success role. It could be an account manager. Because B2B organizations, just the nature of how many customers they have and how they manage their relationships, there tends to be this feeling of ownership. Like, no, this is my customer and you cannot touch them, you cannot talk with them. And so you do need to think about the communication path through whoever that gatekeeper would be. And we have these things set up for good reason, right? We don't want everyone just willy-nilly going out and talking with every customer. Even in B2C organizations, there are rules about how often you can contact someone and about what and what channels. And so my advice to you is to talk with whoever it is who might be, I hate the word gatekeeper, but it's just the easiest one to use. Talk to whoever it is, help them understand the business mission that you're on, why you're looking at this particular journey, what you think the potential outcomes could be from it, and the results of the journey on the business. Tell them who you're getting support from the executive team or your project sponsor or stakeholders, and also help them understand that this is going to be a really great experience for their customer as well. You're going to be listening to everything that they have to say, and it's going to be amazing. Customers feel so wonderful after this. We worked with a software company a few years ago who brought in IT administrators, and at the end of the workshop, one of them said, "I can't believe you listened to me for 6 hours. I feel like I'm part of your family now." So it really is a great way, it's not scalable, of course, but a great way to create engagement and deepen the relationship with customers. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you a wonderful rest of the conference, and keep the journey mindset front of mind.